Have you ever noticed how certain moments seem to trigger an invisible button inside you? Sometimes it's a silly comment, a frown, a message seen but not answered, and that's it. Something inside us contracts. Irritation arrives as if defending something important, but we almost never stop to ask what exactly we are defending. It's curious to realize that, behind this discomfort, there is often a silent insecurity, the kind we don't admit aloud, but which directs our emotions like a hidden conductor. And that's where Stoicism emerges, not as a distant discourse, but as a practical key to understanding what is really happening inside us. When you start looking at your reactions more honestly, it becomes clear that most irritation doesn't stem from the world, but from how you interpret it. And this interpretation almost always carries hidden expectations, unresolved fears, and that desire to control what was never in your hands. The good news? There's enormous freedom waiting for you when you understand that irritation is actually a signal, not an enemy. An invitation to strengthen your inner peace, to take emotional responsibility, and to build a confidence so solid that no external noise can shake it. And in this video, we're going to walk exactly that path. When something irritates you, notice that most of the time, it's not the event itself that triggers the emotion, but your interpretation of it. A harsh word can sound like criticism. A delay in response can seem like disinterest, and so every detail becomes a trigger. It's curious how the mind fills in gaps with assumptions shaped by subtle insecurities. And when this insecurity touches a sensitive point, the irritation grows as if protecting something fragile. Therefore, understanding this process is the beginning of true self-knowledge. The more you understand what you interpret, the more freedom you have to choose how to act. Imagine you're stuck in traffic and someone cuts you off. A simple event, but one that, depending on your internal interpretation, can turn into an emotional storm. Sometimes, you're not irritated by the person cutting you off, but by the accumulation of frustrated expectations from the day. Other times, the reaction stems from the fear of losing control, as if any unforeseen event opens a breach in your inner vulnerabilities. When you start looking at these reactions more carefully, you understand that emotional responsibility is always in your hands. And this awareness naturally leads you to a greater sense of inner peace. A good exercise is to consciously pause whenever irritation arises. Ask yourself, what does this fact really mean, or what am I interpreting it to mean? This simple reflection diminishes the power of automatic reactions and brings you closer to a state of emotional freedom that previously seemed distant. Over time, you will realize that much of the frustration came from the internal narratives you were unconsciously feeding. This isn't about blaming yourself, but about making room for a new perspective. And this new perspective also illuminates the desire for control, a theme that connects directly to the next point. Holding everything into your own hands seems like a way to guarantee security, but in practice, this attempt at control only increases irritation. When something deviates from the internal script you've created, that automatic feeling of maladjustment arises, as if the world were conspiring against your expectations. And that's precisely where the frustration lies. Not in the event itself, but in the difference between what you imagined and what actually happened. This shock reveals points of insecurity that you often didn't even know you carried. Recognizing this opens the door to a much deeper self-knowledge. Consider, for example, when you try to correct someone to do things your way. Sometimes, it's not about helping, but about relieving internal tension that arises when everything gets out of your control. It's as if allowing the other person to act differently threatens your idea of order and stability. And, without realizing it, you become dependent on the other person's behavior to maintain your inner peace. This dependence is a clear sign of emotional insecurity, even if well masked. By recognizing it, you also begin to better understand your own emotional responsibility. A good starting point is to practice conscious detachment. When something goes differently than planned, try taking a deep breath and observing what this difference awakens in you. Notice if it's really the event itself that bothers you or if it's your expectations trying to dictate the rhythm of life. This simple pause already reduces irritation and restores a feeling of freedom that you may not have felt in a long time. Little by little, you learn that the world doesn't need to follow your mold for you to be okay. And this discovery will be essential for understanding how a lack of self-knowledge intensifies emotional reactions, the topic of the next point. When someone irritates you, there's almost always something deeper happening inside you than just a reaction to their behavior. A criticism, an interruption, or even a simple sideways glance only gains strength because it touches on parts of you that you haven't fully understood yet. A lack of self-awareness amplifies reactions, as if every detail has the power to throw you off balance. And, without realizing it, you begin to live guided by old insecurities. This internal struggle prevents true emotional freedom. Realizing this is already part of the healing process. Think about those repetitive situations where you always react the same way, as if there were a hidden button that someone accidentally presses. In reality, the external trigger only reveals something that was already sensitive within you. That's why irritation arises so easily. It echoes unresolved expectations, fears, and vulnerabilities. When you dedicate yourself to identifying these patterns, you begin to realize that many conflicts are, in fact, reflections of yourself. And taking on this emotional responsibility gives you back your power. This is the kind of insight that reduces unnecessary frustrations. A simple exercise is to observe what bothers you most often. Take notes without judgment and try to understand where these discomforts might come from. Sometimes it's an old insecurity asking for attention. Other times, it's an expectation you've created about how the other person should act. This process isn't comfortable, but it brings a profound sense of inner peace. And the more you understand your emotional roots, the less the outside world can destabilize you. In the next point, we'll delve deeper into how silent expectations create frustrations that could be avoided. Much of our frustration stems from expectations we unconsciously create. We expect others to understand our feelings, act as we would, or reciprocate with the same intensity. And when this doesn't happen, irritation arises as if we were being wronged. But deep down, no one has access to the script we've mentally constructed. These hidden expectations reveal a need for validation that connects directly to subtle insecurities. Recognizing this opens up space for greater self-awareness and less unnecessary suffering. It's curious to note how disappointed we become with actions that, in reality, were never planned. Sometimes you expect a message, a gesture, a specific act of care, and when you don't receive it, you feel ignored. But this pain doesn't come from the other person's behavior, but rather from the gap between your expectation and reality. This distance generates internal tension, robbing you of your inner peace. When you free the other person from the burden of meeting your expectations, you also begin to free yourself. And this emotional freedom is a form of maturity that few practice. A powerful practice is to communicate your needs clearly, without expecting the other person to guess what you feel. This avoids misunderstandings and diminishes the power of unspoken expectations. Another practical action is to question your own demands. Do I really need this person to do this? Or am I trying to fill a personal insecurity? This reflection reduces irritation and restores lightness to relationships. Over time, you realize that true emotional responsibility lies in aligning your expectations with reality. And this understanding leads us directly to the next point. True peace does not depend on external cooperation. Believing that your inner peace depends on the behavior of others is like building a house on sand. Any movement around you destabilizes you. When someone doesn't act as you would like, it feels like your balance has been stolen. But this feeling reveals more about your own insecurities than about the world. True stability is born when you understand that control over external events has never been in your hands. And that's precisely where true emotional freedom begins, the kind that doesn't tremble in the face of everyday imperfections. Think about how many times you've felt at peace until someone made a snide comment or responded in an unexpected way. Suddenly, your emotions completely change. This shows how much we still outsource our tranquility. But looking at this with self-awareness, you realize that no one should have that power. Stoicism teaches that serenity is built from the inside out, not the other way around. When you learn to protect your own center, irritation diminishes and emotional responsibility grows. And this change transforms everything around you. A helpful practice is to observe how you react when something goes wrong. Instead of blaming the world, try to perceive what within you is asking for balance. Breathe, observe, and remember that peace is not bought with external obedience, but with inner firmness. And the more you strengthen this point, the more immune you become to the fluctuations of the environment. This emotional independence is one of the strongest antidotes to frustration, and it prepares the ground for us to see how irritation reveals an attempt to control what was never yours, a natural path to the next point. Irritation often arises when we believe, even unconsciously, that everything should happen our way. It's as if there's an internal map dictating exactly how people should act, speak, respond, and even think. When this map isn't followed, a discomfort emerges that seems personal, but actually reveals a subtle attempt to control what doesn't belong to us. This need stems from a hidden insecurity, a feeling that the unexpected threatens our stability. And recognizing this is an important step in developing greater self-awareness. Consider simple everyday situations. Someone takes a long time to respond, another person makes a different decision than yours, or a plan changes at the last minute. In seconds, your mind creates narratives, assumptions, and expectations that intensify frustration. But upon closer observation, you realize that all of this arises because, in some way, you expected reality to conform to your desires. When you let go of this attempt at control, you discover that much of your stress was simply resistance to the natural flow of life. And this acceptance increases your inner peace. A good exercise is to ask yourself, is this really my responsibility? If the answer is no, and most of the time it will be, you can choose to release the burden. This attitude reduces the emotional responsibility you unduly place on yourself and others. By practicing this, emotional freedom begins to expand almost immediately. You start to react less and understand more. And this emotional maturity opens the perfect path to understanding that becoming unshakable is much more powerful than waiting for harmony. The topic of the next point. True strength lies not in living in a world perfectly aligned with your desires, but in maintaining clarity even when everything around you seems out of place. Expecting constant harmony is a silent way of creating impossible expectations, which inevitably lead to frustration. Learning to maintain your inner calm, regardless of the scenario, is an exercise in emotional maturity. This posture diminishes the influence of irritation and reduces the power of insecurities that try to dominate your inner state. This is where the solid feeling of inner peace is born. Think of someone you admire for their serene demeanor. It's not that this person has an easier life, but rather that they have developed the ability to remain centered, even in the face of chaos. This is the result of self-awareness and a deep emotional responsibility, which prevents small external noises from dictating their mood. When you begin to practice the same perspective, you realize that the world loses its ability to bring you down so easily. And the more you strengthen this inner axis, the more freedom you feel to act with presence, and not impulsively. To cultivate this stability, choose small daily practices. A few minutes of conscious breathing, a pause before reacting, an internal questioning of what really bothered you. These simple actions build a personal confidence that doesn't depend on external cooperation. And, little by little, you become someone who navigates emotions with much more ease. Being unshakable doesn't mean being cold, but being whole, even when the world isn't having its best day. And this wholeness prepares us to complete this entire journey of reflection we've undertaken so far. After traversing each point of this journey, it becomes clear that irritation was never just about the outside world. It was always a direct bridge to within yourself. Now that you understand how interpretation, expectations, frustration, and emotional responsibility intertwine, the important question is, what will you do with this knowledge? How do you intend to use this new level of self-awareness to cultivate more inner peace and less emotional strain in your daily life? Transformation begins when you decide to apply, not just understand. So observe your next reactions more closely. Question your interpretations, release control over what isn't yours, and notice how much lighter life becomes when you decide to become unshakable. What would your routine be like if, instead of reacting impulsively, you responded with presence and clarity? How much emotional freedom would that bring? And most importantly, what kind of person would you become if you stopped outsourcing your peace of mind? If this content resonated with you and helped you gain a deeper understanding of your emotional life, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This way, you'll continue receiving reflections that strengthen your self-confidence and help you navigate life with greater balance every day.